So I will do today a kind of weather report on the XCP-ng projects. Basically, what's going on and what's next. So quickly, I'm Oliver. I'm not a Zen or Linux developer. I'm a former sysadmin, so I'm more used to use Zen product than modify them. I created the company called Vates and started Zen Orchestra and XCP-ng projects. By the way, this presentation is also available right now on vates.fr/summit. If you want to access it and get the links directly, you can from there. We got a Twitter and websites. So first, what is XCP-ng? For those that aren't aware, it's a free open source Zen distro for mainly server virtualization using the Zappy tool stack, and it's a fork of Citrix Zen server, which is now Citrix Hypervisor. It's the, I would say, the successor of XCP, the Zen Cloud project that was born in 10 years already. It stands XCP-ng for XCP, new generation, and we are now inside the Linux Foundation within Zen projects. And another thing that's important to understand is that XCP-ng, obviously as a distro, is running on physical machine, but then you can manage everything from Zen Orchestra, which is the management and backup software for XCP-ng. Okay, so what about XCP-ng last year? So in terms of community, that was a pretty nice year. We got a lot of unique downloads, so unique by IP address. The community is still growing very fast in terms of number of users in our forums. So we are still using that a lot because forums are a way that people could join pretty easily. Also, we managed to get to kind of the total RPMs and ISO downloaded in last year, so that's starts to be really significant. And the good thing also is we got a lot of mirrors around the world, and thanks to all the community and some companies who invested to provide some mirrors in almost every continent in the world. We also got a newsletter and we got a lot of subscribers. So basically the newsletter goal is to provide, let's say, one per month or per quarter, it depends, all the news we had on our blog and on the project. So it helps also to keep the community aware on what's going on. So regarding our team, so last year the team grew a lot. So now there's 10 people inside Vates dedicated to work on XCP-ng. So it could be on Zen, Zappy, OpenVSwitch, etc., and continue to grow this year. We've also got new people coming. We've got 5 person on Zen Orchestra, but what matters a lot is the fact that we got more and more external contributors. And on that note, external contributors are just not, for the code or something like that, because again, we are a distro, so there's a lot of different components, but the main one, that the glue around the community, is really the documentation. And this documentation is really important, and even the documentation on how to contribute is really, really vital. So you need to have something like this to answer faster when people ask for modification, and it's a bit, inception, but you need to have a documentation that's easy to contribute to, because when someone is coming on the forum and asking for something, and at some point there's an answer, then you can just tell them, well, go ahead and modify our documentation to add this, could be workaround or even a kind of a recipe to be able to do what you need to do. So having that kind of documentation is important. We are using, by the way, VuePress, and it's on GitHub. So on the bottom of each page, there's a link, so you can automatically create a pull request to modify the page to add your content. So this is really important in a project like XCP-ng. So what about releases? So last year we got our first LTS, the 8.2, so long-term support release for 5 years. We added some features, even pretty interesting ones, but a lot of them are in fact exposed, visible in Zen Orchestra, or doable through Zen Orchestra. So it matters a lot because, as you can see now, we couldn't talk just about XCP-ng alone. It's more, the combo between XCP-ng and Zen Orchestra. So when we have also new features, what helps in general is to have a kind of testing repo where people in the community who really like to test things before it's out there, they can download it and report. That's also an important way for us to improve our process have more feedback before going live to any new feature. Also last year, in terms of contribution to the upstream, we got some Zappy contribution, a pretty decent amount of contribution. So that's really good. And collaboration with the original Zappy team at Citrix is going very well. Also some minor contribution to the storage stack. But also what's interesting is that thanks to our community, we've been able to track some nasty issues that's been hitting, for example, FreeBSD, like the fallout of XSA 332. If you have a presentation, and I suggest that you have a look on this link, because basically we told the story on how people spotted the issue first, how it was discovered, because in our community with a lot of users, pfSense users, and there's been, impacted by this performances bottleneck peering, especially on the network side of things. So it was very visible for them, but not for us. And so that's why having a great community is really handy, to say the least, because we could track the issue and at some point reproduce the issue, and at some point create a message on the XenDevil lists to be able to, have assistance on the upstream. And finally, we found the problem with the great help of Zen developers. So it's really important not just to be able to solve those issues as a community, but it's also important as a project to explain that and to tell the story, because when people are reading this, it is basically increase the trust to the project, because they are exactly seeing that you are transparent about your problems, but also you are sharing how you are able to fix them and how it happens. And this is something got very, very positive feedback in general. Also, another thing happened last year, which is pretty new, I would say. We got some kind of new users, customers coming to XCPng projects. And initially, we got mainly Zen Server or Citrix Hypervisor users, because as a fork, it's pretty easy, to swap, Zen Server and switch to XCPng. The cost is very, very low. So that makes sense to have those users first. But then we started to have users from different platforms and even from VMware world. And both, the VMware, but also some other open source platforms. So we wondered why we started to have these new kind of users. And we started to ask them why, they started to go to XCPng. And the reasons were mainly that because it's easy to deploy and manage, with, a tool called like Zen Orchestra to manage everything. For them, it makes sense. Obviously, having a good communication with the community and a good documentation, even solve problems directly on the forum is something that raises the trust toward your project. For people coming from VMware, the main argument, commercially speaking, was the business model, which is very simple, plain simple, no paywall whatsoever, no limited features whatsoever. It's just you download it, use it, and if you want support, then you just, get a subscription for support. So it's very simple, and a lot of people coming from, the closed source world really are happy with that. But another thing is the vertical integration. What I mean by that is the fact that you need to have something that completely, or at least vertically integrated. So it's not just XCPng. As I said, it's XCPng plus Zen Orchestra. So you can just have orchestration that just work. And by the way, it could be XCPng plus Cloud Stack if you have, very large multiple data centers and kind of things. So what matters to have a kind of middleware, a central point to manage all your machines. And that's why some VMware users were coming to XCPng. And just to make a comparison to them, in fact, it appears that it wasn't on purpose, but in the end, it is what it is. And at some point, you can compare ESX side XCPng running on vReddle with shared storage, and on top of that, you got Zen Orchestra instead of vCenter. So for them, it makes sense, and it didn't require a lot of efforts, to start to be able to manage and being able to work on the platform. In general, we didn't even require some training. So that's another point why it succeeds against other platforms. So quickly about our project focus. So right now, we are obviously x86 centered, especially in the server virtualization world. But again, all of this wouldn't be possible without being fully open source and having the upstream first philosophy. And we want to continue to do that way, to push more content upstream. One of our original goal when we started to be inside, the Zen project in the Linux Foundation was to kind of make a bridge between users and developers. And the story with the XSA, I think, is one proof that it was the case. And thanks to the community, which is pretty large, we got some, early warnings on something that weren't happening the right way. And in the other end, we had the help of the upstream to fix it. So that was a really great thing. So another project focus we have is the ecosystem. So you can have a product, a solution that will work, from nothing, from thin air. So you need to be compatible or being able to, to work with partners. And that's what we do last year, even having with Protectly a partnership where they're selling their small x86 appliance with XCP-ng directly inside it, pre-installed, so you don't have to install it yourself. And also with other hardware providers where we validate, the software, and having hosting companies having XCP-ng out of the box. So you just run the machine and click on, getting XCP-ng, it will install it for you. So that's really important to be relevant today in the virtualization space. In the future, obviously, we will focus not just on the purely data center virtualization world, because I won't say discovered, but we've seen a lot of people that are interested to run virtualization outside the classical use case of the data center, I would say. So the edge computing, using data processing units and all that kind of things like that. So there's more use cases outside the data center that also might be interesting, and where XCP-ng could run out of the box, as long as it's x86. But there is very, I would say, smaller boxes that are running on x86 where XCP-ng could run. So also improving the vertically open integration, I would say, so to work a bit also with open firmware companies and open hardware. Also, ideally supporting other CPU ISAs like, RISC-V, and contribute more upstream and continue to grow the partner ecosystem. So what's next? So on the short term, technically speaking, our next release will have the IPv6 support for the DOM0. So you'll be able to manage a DOM0 without wasting an IPv4. Also with all the Zappy SMAP improvements. Yes, Secure Boot is almost there. It's a matter of, I would say, days or at worst weeks. We started to investigate on VirtIO support to be able to let people having the choice between the traditional, I would say, PV drivers, or at some point, if they need for some use case, to be able to switch easily from VirtIO. So initial tests are quite promising, but we still have to work on the potential integration. So it could be, as easy as to click on something between I want VirtIO or I want to use Zen PV drivers. We also started to investigate on a really interesting project led by Stefano, which is Runx. It's basically running your containers, not with runc, but with Runx, which is starting a very small, lightweight virtual machine. And that might be interesting for more use case in the future of XCP-ng. On the longer term, this is just some extract of a big list of all the things that we plan to work on. It's just some example, but for example, the Q35 chipset emulation. We had a discussion already with, the Zen community about ZenOpsD replacement in Rust. We did a small proof of concept, and we have to wait a bit for Zen ABI to be stable. But still, that might be something that could be reactivated anytime. We are working. We started to work with DPU integration and support. So I will do a talk about DPUs Friday, and we'll have a design session with one DPU manufacturer. So if you're interested on that, feel free to come Friday. We also started to port Zen to RISC-V. So Bobby got a talk tomorrow. Also, there is also very interesting things like getting VM memory encryption or VTPM support. There's a design session by someone at Citrix today, I think, or tomorrow, I don't remember. And obviously, continue to work on a host Secure Boot until we got a point that is working the way we'd like to have with a kernel lockdown and all that kind of stuff. So as you can see, there's a lot of different topics, and hopefully the team is growing. I would say not fast enough because there are so many topics, but at least at a decent pace to be able to catch some of those objectives. So also on the project side of things, we like to become a member of the RISC-V International, which is basically the foundation, the RISC-V Foundation. Continue to grow our ecosystem and to work with more partners. And also we'll have some pretty cool announcements today this year. So we'll have some news at worst next year for another weather report. A quick let's say recap on the trends we've seen because as a virtualization project, we've been in contact with a lot of different companies, and that's really interesting because we discussed with a lot of people working with virtualization, and at some point we've been able to find some interesting trends last year that started to be really I would say pregnant in a virtualization world. So in general, I would say that inside the data center there's some interesting things happening, like at some point, some more diversity coming from the CPU. So ARM is pushing pretty well inside the data centers with cool machines. So we keep that on our radar, and that's interesting. There are DPUs coming pretty fast, the kind of co-processors, if you like, floating the main CPU. So that's a really exciting topic because it will, I think, shape the future of the data center. Also, what came a lot last year was the bare metal hosting, but the way that it's entirely automated through an API. So, before you could rent a machine to a provider, but you have to go with your, credit card and click on next and validate and then wait a bit. But now some providers are providing more and more the kind of physical machine that you could just get and built by the hour. And what's interesting is some users are interested to run XCP-ng of those machines so they could keep control of the hardware at some point, and keep control on there's no noisy neighbors because it's a fully dedicated machine, but you can provision it directly from an API and directly with, IPXE, download XCP-ng on it and deploy it with an ENSO file and get something that just works pretty instantly. Also, as I said, virtualization is, it's not new. It's growing outside the data center. We know that in Zen world since now years, in the embed world, but now even, I would say there's a spectrum between the data center and the embed world. It kind of, between of those two, there's a lot of, I would say, edge computing use cases that are really interesting, where virtualization is more and more needed. We discussed with people doing smart grids, smart cities, and all. Even in one house or building, they need to have temperature for all the rooms, etc., etc. And finally, there's a lot of people need to have some machines inside the building. But then the virtualization, you can have one physical machine with a lot of different VMs, and so every provider is happy to have their own whatever they want, whatever they need. So virtualization is really going, I would say, full thrust outside the data center. Even the industry is interested by virtualization, even, directly into the factory and the kind of things. They need virtualization at some point because I would say industry is maybe 15 years or maybe 20 years, late in the IT world. They are discovering things at some point that are, virtualization, for example. And when they discovered that you could, deploy very easily virtual machine and you got isolation, etc., they're really, really interested. But sadly, they lack the experience. And in the end, I think we could provide that kind of things because we have some experience in the classical IT world. And also, it's something to say, but that's again not new, but it's also doing full thrust. The DevOps practices are increased a lot. By that, I mean, for example, using Terraform or Packer or all that kind of thing. So that's why we work to get infrastructure as code, let's say Terraform software, for example, entirely compatible with XCP-ng and Orchestra, so you can write infrastructure as code even on-prem. And some customers are using their almost same recipe for AWS or even XCP-ng on-prem. So the famous hybrid cloud thing. So, that's why it's really important for your project when you are getting a product that's doing a full stack solution to provide that kind of integration. So that's why we worked to get those features. So in conclusion, 2020 was a special but busy year. Basically, we got more everything, so that's really nice for the XCP-ng projects. And we saw that despite the public cloud or claims of some companies, there's still huge request for a fully open source and easy to use virtualization platform. It's pretty incredible and beyond what I could imagine when we started XCP-ng 3 years ago from now. But to do that, to achieve that, you need to have a good integration, automation, being transparent, again, telling your story, telling when you got issues, and all the kind of things. It is, I would say, the same level of importance than just having, technical features or things like that. So it's really explaining what you do, the way you are doing it, and doing that with all the community and try to bridge different communities together, which is really, really exciting. So this is it for this kind of weather report on XCP-ng. I did it pretty quick, so not to bore anyone. If you have a question, feel free to go ahead, and then that's it. Okay, Stack Trust. So you ask a question about Vagrant Packer. So yeah, there is a Packer plugin that we've been working on. In fact, we sponsored someone to do that. He did the Terraform plugin for Xen Orchestra. There is a Packer plugin for XCP-ng, but we managed to see that the Packer plugin could also work with Xen Orchestra. So I think that would be great, that maybe in the next month or two, we'll have the Packer compatibility with the Xen Orchestra. So you got one endpoint to connect. And again, it's Xen Orchestra in the end is acting like a middleware. So you have one central point to connect to manage everything. So Vagrant, there's no drivers that I would know right now, but if there's enough traction, obviously we could do that kind of things. It's just hard to, try to pick a choice with all the tools that are existing. It's mainly people, driving that, the community asking. If there's a lot of people asking for something, then we will manage to make it real. But obviously, contributions are welcome. We could assist on, how to do that on the API side. That will be oh yeah, there's a Vagrant Xen server plugin. So I suppose, thanks Edwin, I suppose that it should work out of the box with XCP-ng. In fact, the Packer plugin was mainly forked for the Xen server Packer plugin. And I suppose we could do the same for Vagrant to be more active on it, because sadly some of those plugins were unmaintained anymore. So we could do that, but I didn't remember they got one for Vagrant. So that might be a good base to work on. You're welcome, Stack Trust. Yeah, Christopher, regarding the XenOpsD thing, we'll be happy to move forward, but again, I think it's a question of not rushing things until we got something done on the Xen ABI side. So I think we'll have other probably sessions to discuss that with Andrew and Al on the rest. So thank you, everyone, and see you on the hallway track for some networking. Thank you. Bye-bye.